The windshield wipers hammered back and forth, so hard they almost disappeared beneath the sheets of Virginia rain. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel when the familiar tremor started deep in my left wrist before creeping toward my elbow. I checked the dashboard clock. I still had a little over an hour before I needed my next dose. That should have been enough time. Should have. My Navy identification card rested inside my jacket pocket, pressing lightly against my chest every time the car hit a pothole. Most people thought that little piece of plastic represented rank. To me, it represented responsibility. The medication waiting in my travel bag wasn't optional. It was part of a treatment plan monitored through Navy Medical Command because of injuries my nervous system picked up after years supporting medical logistics in hostile environments. Missing a dose wasn't something I shrugged off with a glass of water and an aspirin. The estate came into view through the rain exactly the way I remembered it. Huge white columns, perfect hedges, a circular driveway that looked like it had never seen a tire track. My parents had spent 30 years making the house look flawless. They had never spent nearly that much energy making the people inside it feel welcome. I parked near the front entrance and grabbed my overnight bag from the passenger seat. Before I even reached the porch, the front door opened, not because someone was excited to see me. One of the house staff had noticed me through the security cameras. My mother didn't even walk over. She stood inside the foyer arranging white orchids in a crystal vase that probably cost more than my first used car. She glanced up once. "Oh," she said, "you actually wore that." I looked down at my jeans, clean boots, and navy pullover. "It's called civilian clothing, Mom. It looks inexpensive." I wasn't aware we had a dress code. She adjusted another orchid without looking at me again. "Clara has important guests arriving tomorrow. Try not to look like you just wandered out of a government warehouse." I almost laughed. After 15 years in uniform, I had been called worse by people with far better senses of humor. "I'll survive. I'm talking about our reputation." That sentence told me everything I needed to know about the weekend. Not "how are you feeling?" Not "welcome home." Not "it's been too long." Just reputation. I carried my overnight bag upstairs toward the guest room I'd been using since college. My own bedroom had quietly become Clara's creative studio years ago, without anyone bothering to ask if I minded. Apparently, military deployments counted as moving out permanently. I set my leather medical kit inside the closet beside my suitcase and glanced at my phone. 48 minutes. Still enough time. As I walked back downstairs, laughter echoed from the dining room. Clara. She was giving a private preview of tomorrow night's gallery launch to 2 event planners. She spotted me first. There she is. Her smile looked perfect from across the room. Up close, it always carried just enough satisfaction to remind me she'd never had to earn anything. She hugged me with one arm. "Thanks for coming. I didn't know attendance was optional." It wasn't. She laughed as though I'd made the joke. One planner looked at me.
"Clara says you're in healthcare."
"I'm a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy." Oh, an awkward pause. Clara stepped in before anyone could ask another question. "Audrey works with supplies and paperwork." I smiled politely. Sometimes, I didn't bother explaining battlefield medical logistics, controlled pharmaceuticals distribution, casualty support chains, or emergency evacuation planning. If Clara wanted the simplified version, she could keep it. The truth didn't need defending every 5 minutes. My father finally entered from his study carrying 2 folders under one arm. He didn't say hello. His eyes went directly to the window overlooking the driveway, then to me. "Is that muddy SUV yours?" "Yes, you parked in front. I noticed. It ruins the entrance." I blinked. "The rain ruined the entrance." "No. Your vehicle did." He walked closer. "Move it behind the servants' quarters." I stared at him. "The driveway is almost empty." "It won't be tomorrow. I'll move it tomorrow morning." "You'll move it now." I could already feel the tingling reaching my fingertips. Every unnecessary delay mattered. I'd rather get settled first. His expression hardened. I wasn't asking. Nobody else in the room said a word. Not Clara, not my mother, not the planners pretending to examine flower arrangements. I picked up my keys. Fine. As I walked outside again, my phone buzzed with an automated reminder. Medication due in 039. I silenced the notification and slipped the phone back into my pocket. If you're wondering why that reminder mattered so much, keep it in the back of your mind. Before this weekend ended, one locked object inside this house would expose far more than anyone in my family imagined. At that moment, I still believed it held only something I couldn't afford to lose. I had no idea what else would eventually come out of it. That answer wouldn't arrive until much later, but everything started with a simple order to move my car. The gravel behind the estate turned into wet mud where deliveries usually unloaded. The servants' parking area sat behind an oversized detached garage that guests never saw. I parked exactly where my father wanted. When I stepped out, another tremor ran through both hands, stronger this time. I took one slow breath, then another, using the same breathing routine I'd practiced during deployments whenever my nervous system decided to remind me it had its own opinions. I reached back into the SUV for my overnight bag. Before I could lift it, I heard the electric motor. The heavy garage door beside me started coming down, slow, steady, loud enough to drown out the rain. I turned. Hello? No answer. The steel door slammed into the concrete floor with a violent crash that echoed through the empty service yard. Darkness swallowed the space around me. Cold air settled against my skin. Another tremor rolled through both arms, harder than the first, while the only people who should have cared were inside celebrating my sister. I rubbed my hands together until the shaking eased just enough for me to grip the handle of my overnight bag and walk back toward the house. Nobody came looking for me. Nobody asked why I'd been gone so long. By the time I stepped into the dining room, the party at the table had already started. The room looked like something out of a luxury magazine. Crisp white linen covered the 30-foot dining table. Crystal glasses reflected the chandelier above. Silver serving dishes lined the center beside fresh flowers that matched the orchids in the foyer. My parents spared no expense when Clara was the guest of honor. Albert stood at the head of the table holding a glass of champagne. To Clara, he announced. The most gifted artist this family has ever produced. Everyone applauded. Clara smiled modestly for about 2 seconds before soaking up every compliment in the room. I couldn't have done it without my parents. That part, at least, was true. Her gallery occupied a renovated warehouse my father purchased through one of his development companies. My mother handled every charity connection, every invitation list, every newspaper interview. I once overheard an accountant mention that nearly $1.8 million had gone into launching Clara's career. Meanwhile, I bought my own first car with deployment savings. Funny how independence becomes offensive when someone profits from dependence. One of the guests noticed me standing near the doorway. Audrey, come join us. Before I could answer, my mother smiled without warmth. She's probably exhausted. Government work doesn't exactly prepare people for social evenings. A few polite laughs floated around the table. I pulled out a chair anyway. I've survived meetings with Pentagon procurement officers, I said. I think I can handle dinner. That earned a few genuine chuckles. Clara's smile tightened for half a second. Small victory. A server placed a steak in front of me. The smell should have made me hungry. Instead, my stomach tightened. The numbness in my fingers was spreading. I discreetly checked my watch beneath the table. Medication overdue by 9 minutes. I needed my kit now. Albert continued speaking. Our family has always believed in investing where excellence exists. I almost asked whether that policy had started before or after I enlisted. Instead, I pushed back my chair. Excuse me, I'll be right back. Nobody objected. Nobody asked if I was feeling all right. That was convenient. The guest room sat exactly where I'd left it. I crossed to the closet, reached for my travel bag, and unzipped the main compartment. Clothes, laptop, boot polish, toiletries. No medical kit. I frowned. I emptied everything onto the bed. Still nothing. I checked every zipper twice, then a third time. The secure brown leather pouch issued through Navy Medical Command wasn't there. For 1 second, I questioned my own memory. Maybe I'd left it in the SUV. No, I'd carried it upstairs myself. I remembered placing it beside my suitcase because I always kept controlled medication away from direct sunlight. My pulse climbed. I searched the room anyway. Closet, desk, bathroom, nightstand, nothing. The shaking reached both hands now. Not panic. Training doesn't leave much room for panic, but something colder. Someone had taken it. There weren't many possibilities. I walked back downstairs without rushing. People notice panic. People rarely notice calm. The hallway outside my father's study was empty, except for Albert pouring himself another drink from a crystal decanter. He looked at me over the rim of his glass. You look pale. I need my medical kit. So, it disappeared. He took another sip. Did it? I held his eyes. You went through my luggage. I had someone inspect it. You had no authority. My house. my property, my medical treatment. He slowly rotated the gold signet ring on his right hand, the same habit he'd had since I was a teenager, whenever he believed he'd already won an argument. I removed something I considered dangerous. Every muscle in my shoulders stiffened. My medication. He nodded. Correct. You stole federally prescribed medication. I confiscated it. You don't get to redefine theft. His smile barely changed. Those military drugs have been filling your head with nonsense for years. They keep my nervous system functioning. They keep you dependent. I stared at him. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. I know enough. No, you don't. He folded his arms. I've watched you come home from deployments colder every year. I've come home alive, barely. My doctors manage my treatment. Government. Doctors. Board-certified specialists. They work for the same institution that convinced you destroying your body was honorable. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was amazing how confidently someone could speak about a condition they'd never bothered to understand. My medication is regulated because it's effective, I said evenly. It is not recreational. It is not optional. It is prescribed after extensive neurological evaluation. I take it every 12 hours. I don't care what brochure they handed you. He set the glass down. I locked it away. The hallway suddenly felt much quieter. Where? In my study safe. My eyes shifted toward the closed mahogany door. You'll open it. No. I need my medication. You need perspective. My next dose is already late. You'll survive. My physician would disagree. I'm your father. And you're interfering with medical treatment. I am protecting my daughter from addictive military-grade chemicals. I shook my head. This isn't addiction. It's treatment. It's battlefield hysteria wearing a prescription label. For the first time that evening, I realized this wasn't ignorance. It was control. He didn't care what the medication did. He cared that something essential to my life existed outside his authority. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell expensive cologne mixed with bourbon. You've spent too many years letting people salute you. They salute the uniform. They obey the rank. They won't be here tonight. Another tremor passed through my arms. He noticed. His expression almost brightened. You see? You can't even hold yourself steady. Because you took my medication. Because you've convinced yourself you need it. I stood as straight as my body allowed. I'm asking one last time. Open the safe. Albert closed the remaining distance until only inches separated us. He raised one finger and pressed it firmly against the center of my jacket, directly over the Navy identification card in my pocket. In this house, he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear, that rank means absolutely nothing. His fingers stayed there another second before he stepped back, leaving me standing in the hallway with empty hands, worsening symptoms, and my only lifeline locked behind cold steel. I kept my breathing slow as I walked away from my father's study before my legs decided they had other plans. Getting angry wouldn't help. Arguing again wouldn't unlock the safe. I needed a clear head, and right now my own nervous system was trying to work against me. The guest room door clicked shut behind me. For the first time all evening, I allowed myself to lean against the wall. The tremor that had started in my forearms now ran through both hands without stopping. My vision blurred around the edges whenever I turned my head too quickly. A heavy pressure settled behind my eyes, the kind my neurologist always warned me never to ignore. I looked at my watch. 36 minutes late. Every minute mattered. I reached for my phone and opened the medication schedule my Navy physician had built into my treatment app. The reminder had changed color. Missed dose. A second notification asked whether the medication had been administered. I closed the screen without answering. Not yet. There was no point documenting a missed dose until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. I sat carefully on the edge of the bed and started tactical box breathing. 4 seconds in, hold. 4 seconds out, hold. I'd learned it years ago after a convoy attack overseas. People assumed breathing exercises were about staying calm. They weren't. They were about keeping your brain useful when your body wanted to quit. By the 5th cycle, the shaking had eased just enough for me to think clearly. Then someone knocked once. Without waiting for an answer, Clara walked in. She carried a slim black folder under one arm and a glass of white wine in the other. You look terrible. I'd return the compliment, but I'd rather save my energy. She smiled. Still funny. I've always been funny. You've always been difficult. She closed the door behind her and placed the folder on the bed between us. I brought something. If it's sympathy, you're in the wrong room. It's paperwork. Of course it was. Everything in this family eventually became paperwork. She slid the folder toward me. I opened it. The first page carried the logo of one of my father's law firms. The title caught my attention immediately. Irrevocable, durable power of attorney. The second document was worse. Authorization for liquidation of my military retirement investment account. My eyes stopped on the estimated balance. $684,912.47. Years of deployments, years of hazard pay, years of automatic contributions, years of choosing government housing over luxury apartments because I believed planning ahead mattered. Every dollar represented time I couldn't get back. What is this? My solution, my retirement, my gallery. I looked up. You've lost your mind. My gallery has temporary cash flow issues. I read financial reports for military logistics. Temporary isn't the word I'd use. She shrugged. The economy has been unfair. The economy didn't make you spend $94,000 on a sculpture nobody bought. Her smile disappeared. You checked? Public bankruptcy filings exist for a reason. She crossed her arms. You know what your problem is? I've heard several theories. You think wearing a uniform makes you smarter than everyone else. No. It makes you judgmental. It makes me read contracts before signing them. She laughed. There it is. What? The government version of you. I closed the folder. I'm not signing anything. You haven't heard the offer. I don't need to. Our parents are willing to forgive your attitude. My attitude? If you help the family, I have helped the family. When? Every Christmas I showed up. She rolled her eyes. I mean financially. I've paid every one of my own bills since I was 21. And you? Benefited from this family's name before that. I couldn't help smiling. My Navy recruiter never asked who my parents were. No, but colleges did. I attended a state university on ROTC scholarship. Our address still mattered. No, it opened doors. It gave people an excuse to compare me to you. Her face hardened. You owe this family. I owe the Navy 22 more months before my current service obligation ends. I'm talking about real loyalty. I leaned forward despite the stiffness creeping into my shoulders. Real loyalty doesn't involve stealing someone's medication. She took a sip of wine. You're making this dramatic. I think locking away prescription medication qualifies. You'll get it back. When? When you're more cooperative. The room suddenly felt smaller. So this was planned. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence answered for her. I thought back over the evening, Dad ordering me to move the SUV, the garage, the missing medical kit, the safe. None of it had been impulsive. Someone had decided before I even arrived that my treatment would become leverage. Clara walked around the room examining old family photos hanging on the wall. You know what always amazed me? What? You actually liked being deployed. I liked serving. You liked escaping. No. She turned toward me. You built an entire identity around being needed somewhere else. I built a career. You built excuses. I built independence. Same thing. I stood slowly. The pressure behind my eyes surged. So that's the plan? You refuse my medication until I finance your gallery. She gave a tiny shrug. When you say it like that, it sounds terrible. Because it is terrible. She stepped close enough to lower her voice. My gallery doesn't fail. Businesses fail every day. Mine won't. Not with my retirement. Especially with your retirement. I looked directly into her eyes. You think because my hands are shaking, I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. I think you'll become practical. I've been practical my entire adult life. You've been stubborn. I folded the documents, placed them back inside the folder, and handed them to her. No, she didn't take them immediately. Instead, she looked at my trembling fingers. I knew what she saw. The worsening symptoms, the slower movements, the effort it took just to remain standing. She finally accepted the folder. I can wait. I can too. You really can't. She leaned close enough that I could hear every word without her raising her voice. You'll sign before this weekend is over. I didn't answer. She smiled one last time. A broken soldier is nothing without her pills. The door closed softly behind her. The silence that followed was almost worse. I stood alone in the dim guest room, forcing myself through another cycle of box breathing while my vision blurred again and the muscles in my legs tightened. My family hadn't hidden my medication because they misunderstood my condition. They had hidden it because they believed my collapsing said body would eventually become the most persuasive lawyer they could ever hire. I kept my eyes on the closed door for another minute after Clara left, listening to the silence settle back into the room. My breathing was no longer steady. The pressure behind my eyes had become constant, and every attempt to unclench my hands ended with another wave of muscle stiffness running through my forearms. I checked my watch. 1 hour and 23 minutes overdue. My neurologist had always been very direct. Don't try to be tough, Lieutenant Commander. Your body doesn't care about pride. Follow the schedule. I had followed it for nearly 3 years, until tonight. I reached for my phone again. 3 missed notifications waited on the screen. Medication compliance reminder. Medication compliance reminder. Final reminder before mandatory reporting. Most civilians never think about how military medicine works. You don't simply receive controlled medication and disappear. Every prescription involving a federally regulated Schedule II substance travels through a documented chain of custody. Every refill is logged. Every transfer is recorded. Every dose is expected within a monitored treatment plan approved by military physicians. Some people complain about all the paperwork. Personally, I appreciated knowing someone was paying attention when something went wrong. I pushed myself off the bed. The movement felt like lifting twice my own weight. Each step toward the writing desk required concentration. Left foot, pause. Right foot, pause again. I finally reached the chair and lowered myself into it before my legs decided for me. Inside the bottom drawer sat a slim black case. Unlike my personal phone, this device belonged to the Navy, military issued, encrypted, reserved for official communication and protected medical reporting. I placed my thumb against the biometric reader. Access Vera. The screen came alive. A secure operating systems loaded without advertisements, social media notifications, or anything unrelated to work. Straight to business. Exactly how I liked it. I selected Navy Medical Command. My credentials authenticated automatically through my identification certificate. The treatment dashboard opened. Immediately, a yellow warning banner stretched across the top. Dose not logged, response while. Below it appeared 3 options: medication administered, medical delay authorized, override and continue monitoring. Most people would probably choose the third option. It existed for legitimate situations: delayed flights, temporary pharmacy issues, unexpected operational assignments. One tap, one explanation, and the system would continue tracking without raising additional concerns. My finger hovered over the screen. Then I lowered my hand. No. That option would create a false record. My medication hadn't been delayed. It had been taken. Not by accident. Not because I forgot. Someone had intentionally broken federal custody of government-issued controlled medication. There was another menu hidden beneath the standard reporting options. Most Navy personnel never needed it. I tapped administrative exception, then compliance, then controlled substance incident. Several categories appeared: damaged shipment, temperature exposure, transportation loss, unauthorized access. I selected the last one. The screen requested additional information. Describe incident. I typed carefully despite the tremor. Medication removed without authorization from personal custody while off duty. Potential civilian interference. Unable to verify storage conditions. I stopped. Deleted the last sentence. Started again. Facts. Only facts. Military reports weren't novels. They didn't need emotion. They needed accuracy. I entered the revised statement. Allocated medication no longer in authorized possession. Civilian individual admits removing secured medical property without authorization. The system processed my entry. Another menu appeared. Compliance action. Routine review. Medical consultation. Immediate security notification. My breathing slowed. This was the point where everything changed. Most officers never touched that last option. Using it unnecessarily carried consequences. Using it correctly protected lives. I remembered every annual compliance briefing I'd ever attended. The instructor always repeated one sentence. The medication belongs to the treatment plan, but federal accountability belongs to the United States government. It wasn't simply my prescription. It remained federally audited medical property assigned to an active duty service member. If the documented chain of custody broke, someone had to answer for it. Not because the government enjoyed paperwork, because controlled substances disappearing without explanation created real risks: diversion, tampering, theft, fraud. None of those possibilities could be ignored. I opened the final reporting screen. At the bottom sat a security designation rarely discussed outside compliance training. Cargo intercepted. Chain of custody severed. I stared at it. My father thought he had confiscated pills. The Navy would see something very different. A federally documented medical shipment allocated to an active duty officer had been removed from authorized possession. The reason didn't matter yet. Only the custody failure did. I selected the designation. A confirmation window appeared. Security flag initiates mandatory compliance review. Continue? Yes. No. Outside my bedroom window, I could hear distant laughter drift up from the first floor. The dinner party hadn't ended. Crystal glasses clinked together. Someone laughed at one of my father's stories. My family believed they had complete control over the weekend. They had no idea they had already stepped into a system built by people who cared very little about family influence, expensive homes, or political friendships. Military compliance officers didn't negotiate chain of custody violations over dinner. They investigated them. I pressed yes. The device required one final authentication. Identity confirmed, rank, Lieutenant Commander Audrey Garrison. Status, active duty, medication category. Class 2 controlled substance, security flag accepted. For nearly 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen dimmed, a progress bar crossed the display, establishing secure connection, encrypted transmission in progress. My hands continued shaking as I watched, not from fear, from knowing exactly what came next. Somewhere inside Navy Medical Command, automated compliance software would compare inventory records, prescription logs, custody documentation, and my treatment schedule. No human being had to believe me first. The records would begin speaking before anyone picked up a phone. The progress bar reached 100%. The entire screen suddenly flashed deep red. Transmission ceased. Compliance protocol activated. Case reference incumbent. The message remained visible for only 3 seconds before disappearing into a secure confirmation receipt. That was it. No dramatic alarm, no phone call, no flashing sirens outside the house. Just a silent transmission disappearing through encrypted military networks while my parents poured champagne downstairs. I powered off the device and rested both hands on the desk. My medication was still locked inside my father's safe. My body was still getting worse by the minute. But for the first time since arriving at the estate, something was moving that my family couldn't interrupt, delay, charm, or buy. They believed they had hidden one leather medical pouch. They never realized they had quietly triggered a federal compliance process that didn't care whose last name was carved above the front door. I woke up after less than 3 hours of broken sleep, with my muscles already fighting me. Getting out of bed took longer than I wanted to admit. Every joint felt stiff. My hands wouldn't fully close around the zipper on my jacket. When I looked into the bathroom mirror, the woman staring back looked 10 years older than the one who had driven through the gates yesterday. My medication was now more than 14 hours overdue. I checked my secure Navy device. No new messages, no missed calls, nothing. That didn't surprise me. Military compliance investigations rarely announced themselves in advance. They simply arrived. Downstairs, the house had transformed into exactly the kind of event my parents loved. Professional caterers moved through the hall carrying silver trays. A string quartet played near the grand staircase. Fresh flower arrangements filled every corner with white orchids and pale roses. Someone had even rented additional crystal chandeliers for the ballroom connected to the foyer. The event wasn't really about art. It was about status. The paintings hanging on temporary display walls were simply expensive decorations for wealthy people congratulating other wealthy people. I stayed near the back wall beside a marble column where I wouldn't have to pretend I was enjoying myself. Standing still was becoming difficult. The tremors had spread into my shoulders, forcing me to keep my arms folded to hide the shaking. One of the catering staff quietly approached me. "Ma'am, would you like some water? Please." He handed me a cold bottle without asking questions. "Thank you. You don't look well. I'll manage." He gave a small nod. "I was in the army." That explained why he noticed. "You, medic." We exchanged the kind of silent understanding veterans often do. No dramatic conversation, no speeches, just recognition. "I hope your day gets better," he said before returning to work. "So do I." Across the room, Clara stood beneath a spotlight, explaining one of her paintings to a circle of guests. "I wanted this collection to explore emotional freedom." I almost laughed. Coming from someone trying to blackmail her own sister, that sentence deserved its own exhibit. Title it Irony in Mixed Media. The applause that followed sounded sincere. Money has a remarkable ability to improve artistic reviews. My mother spotted me from across the room and waved me over with 2 fingers. That usually meant trouble. I crossed the foyer carefully, making sure my legs didn't betray me. She smiled brightly at an older man wearing a tailored navy suit. "Senator Whitmore, I'd like you to meet our older daughter, Audrey." The senator extended his hand. "It's a pleasure." "You too, Senator." Before I could say anything else, my mother continued. "Audrey's had a challenging few years." I looked at her. She ignored me. She needed to come home and find her footing again. The senator's expression shifted immediately. Not pity. The careful politeness people use when they think someone is recovering from poor life choices. "I see." I smiled anyway. "I actually serve as a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy." His eyebrows lifted. "Oh, I oversee medical logistics. I appreciate your service." Before we could continue, my mother laughed softly. "She's always so modest about the government keeping her busy. Government, not Navy, not military, not service." She had a talent for reducing everything I had accomplished into something that sounded temporary. The senator turned back toward me. "How long have you been in?" 15 years. "That's impressive." "It has been meaningful." My mother gently touched his arm. "Well, Clara is the artist in the family." The comparison. Always unnecessary, always deliberate. The senator glanced between us. "I imagine both daughters have made you proud." My mother hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "We're certainly grateful everyone eventually found their place." Eventually. Interesting choice of word. I excused myself before the conversation became any more uncomfortable. Walking across the foyer required concentration. The polished marble floor seemed to shift beneath my feet every few steps. I reached the back wall again and rested one hand against the cool stone. A familiar voice spoke beside me. "You look awful." I didn't turn. "Hello, Clara. You should have signed." "I still have time." She smiled. "Not much. I've handled worse situations. Without your medication?" I looked at her. "You really don't understand what you've done." "I understand leverage." "No. You understand manipulation." She shrugged. "Same result." I left before the conversation could continue. Arguing with someone who saw human suffering as a negotiating tactic was like debating gravity, completely pointless. I checked my watch, nearly 26 hours since my last dose. The symptoms had become impossible to hide. My right hand shook visibly. The muscles in my jaw tightened every few minutes. Bright light from the chandeliers made the pressure behind my eyes even worse. Guests noticed. Most were too polite to stare. Some weren't. A woman whispered something to her husband while glancing toward me. He nodded. They both looked away. My parents probably assumed everyone believed their story about me needing to find my footing. They had no idea how close the truth was to walking through their front door. The quartet finished another classical piece. Servers circulated with champagne. Someone tapped a spoon against a crystal glass, asking everyone to gather near Clara's display for Albert's speech. He raised another champagne flute. "My daughter Clara represents everything this family believes in. Hard work, vision, character." The words barely registered. Something else caught my attention first. A vibration, low, rhythmic, too deep to be music. At first I thought it was distant thunder. Then every crystal glass on the nearest table trembled almost imperceptibly. Several guests looked toward the front windows. The vibration grew louder, steady, controlled engines, heavy vehicles. 3 dark SUVs rolled through the estate gates and onto the immaculate gravel driveway. No government markings. No flashing lights. Just identical black vehicles moving with quiet precision. Instead of stopping near the guest parking area, they continued straight to the front entrance. Then they spread out. One in the center, one to each side, completely blocking the circular drive. The string quartet stopped playing. Conversations faded one by one. Even Albert lowered his champagne glass. "What is this?" someone whispered. I already knew. My secure report from the previous night hadn't disappeared into a computer. It had reached people whose job was to verify facts, protect federal medical property, and preserve the chain of custody. My pulse stayed steady despite everything my body was doing. For the first time since arriving at the estate, I wasn't the only person who understood that this weekend had just changed. The lead SUV door opened, then another, then 6 more. Uniformed personnel stepped out with practiced discipline, moving neither fast nor slow. Purpose didn't require speed. The massive front doors swung inward before anyone inside could reach them. Every conversation died instantly. The polished marble foyer echoed with one unmistakable sound: the sharp, measured boots of United States Navy Shore Patrol officers crossing the threshold. I watched the shore patrol officers enter without a trace of urgency. That was the first thing civilians usually misunderstood. Professionals didn't rush unless something had already gone wrong. They moved with quiet confidence because they expected people to cooperate. 6 officers spread through the foyer in practiced formation, leaving clear paths instead of creating panic. They weren't pointing weapons. They weren't shouting commands. They were simply taking control of the space. The conversations around the room faded into nervous whispers. One of the country club guests leaned toward another. Did someone call the military? I have no idea. Is this about national security? If it were, another man muttered, I doubt we'd still be standing here. The lead officer stepped through the center of the foyer. Chief Hospital Corpsman Gideon Sterling. His dress whites looked freshly pressed, despite the drive through the rain. Every ribbon sat perfectly aligned above his left pocket. His silver anchors caught the chandelier light without a single fingerprint on them. He wasn't physically intimidating because of his size. He was intimidating because he carried himself like someone who had spent decades enforcing standards that didn't bend for anyone. His eyes swept across the room only once. Guests, security, entrances, exits. Then they stopped on me. I straightened automatically despite the tremor running through my shoulders. He gave one almost invisible nod, not friendly, professional. He had located the reporting officer. That was enough. My father stepped forward before anyone else could speak. The smile he reserved for investors appeared immediately. Good afternoon. Chief Sterling didn't answer. Albert extended his hand anyway. I'm Albert Garrison. I own several commercial developments throughout Fairfax County. If there's been some misunderstanding, I'm sure we can. The offered hand remained suspended in the air. Chief Sterling never looked at it. After several awkward seconds, Albert lowered it. I'm afraid you've interrupted a private family function. Chief Sterling finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Lieutenant Commander Audrey Garrison, present. Every guest turned toward me. I stepped away from the wall. The movement took more effort than I wanted anyone to notice. Chief Sterling studied me for a moment. His eyes caught the tremor in my right hand. He noticed the stiffness in my posture. Then he looked back toward Albert. Are you Albert Garrison? I already introduced myself. Answer the question. Yes. Are you in possession of medical property allocated to Lieutenant Commander Audrey Garrison by United States Navy Medical Command? Albert gave a short laugh. I think we've reached the misunderstanding. He spread his hands dramatically for the audience. My daughter has been under considerable stress. Several guests nodded sympathetically. He continued, we simply secured certain medications while she spends a few days recovering with family. Recovering. Interesting choice of word. Chief Sterling's expression didn't change. Is that a yes? Albert smiled. I wouldn't describe it that way. I asked a direct question. I've temporarily stored some prescription medication, so your answer is yes. Albert's smile weakened. I wouldn't use military terminology inside my own home. Chief Sterling removed a small notebook from his breast pocket and wrote something without comment. The scratching of his pen somehow sounded louder than the conversations had only moments earlier. My mother finally stepped forward. There really isn't any reason to embarrass everyone. Chief Sterling looked at her. Identify yourself. I'm Eleanor Garrison. Relationship to Lieutenant Commander Garrison. I'm her mother. Did you participate in removing federally documented medical property from Lieutenant Commander Garrison's authorized possession? Her face tightened. We're trying to help our daughter. That was not the question. She looked toward my father for help. He stepped back into the conversation. My wife and I have spent 30 years protecting our family. I didn't ask about your family. I think you're making assumptions. I don't make assumptions. The room became very quiet. I document facts. Albert folded his arms. The fact is that she's dependent on dangerous medication. The fact, Chief Sterling replied calmly, is that you're admitting possession. Albert looked around at his guests before lowering his voice. This conversation doesn't belong in front of everyone. Chief Sterling didn't lower his own. It belongs wherever federally regulated property is located. The sentence echoed through the foyer. Several guests slowly backed away. One woman quietly placed her champagne glass on a serving tray without taking another sip. Chief Sterling closed his notebook. I require the immediate physical presentation of Lieutenant Commander Audrey Garrison's allocated medical cargo. Albert frowned. Cargo? The secured medication assigned to Lieutenant Commander Garrison. It's locked safely. Where? In my study. Retrieve it. No. The answer hung in the air. I said no. Chief Sterling stood perfectly still. I don't believe you understand the situation. Albert laughed again. I understand property rights. You understand neither property rights nor federal custody requirements. This is my residence. The location is irrelevant. The medication entered my house. The medication remained united. States government-controlled medical property. Albert's jaw tightened. I decide what stays inside my safe. You do not. I absolutely do. Chief Sterling looked briefly toward one of the shore patrol officers standing nearby. The officer made no movement. He simply waited. Albert seemed to mistake that patience for hesitation. You've walked into a family disagreement. No, you have. No. My daughter isn't thinking clearly. Chief Sterling's eyes shifted toward me again. Lieutenant Commander, did you voluntarily surrender your prescribed medication? No, Chief. Did you authorize any civilian to assume custody? No, Chief. Did you submit a compliance report through Navy Medical Command? Yes, Chief. He nodded once. That completed his timeline. Everything else became documentation. Albert took another step closer. Listen, Chief. Chief Sterling cut him off before he finished. No. Albert blinked. No? You will address me by my rank or not at all. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. The balance of power inside the room had changed, and everyone could feel it. My father still believed wealth created authority. Chief Sterling operated inside a system where authority came from regulations, accountability, and evidence. Those things couldn't be bought. Albert pointed toward the staircase. This entire situation is ridiculous. Chief Sterling finally met his eyes without looking away. When he spoke, every word carried through the ballroom. Mr. Garrison, the unauthorized possession of federally audited military narcotics allocated to an active duty service member constitutes a potential felony under Title 18 of the United States Code. The room froze. Nobody reached for another drink, nobody whispered, nobody applauded Clara's exhibition. Even the catering staff stopped moving. For the first time in my father's life, an entire room full of influential people looked at him not as the wealthiest man in the house, but as the man standing between federal authorities and evidence they had just announced they intended to recover. I kept my eyes on Chief Sterling while the silence settled over the ballroom. My parents had spent decades building a reputation that could make people overlook almost anything. Expensive dinners, political donations, charity galas, country club memberships. None of that meant much when federal compliance officers were standing in the middle of the foyer. Chief Sterling didn't raise his voice. He simply looked toward the shore patrol team. Establish a controlled perimeter. Yes, Chief. The response came instantly. 2 officers moved toward the front entrance. Another secured the hallway leading to my father's study. The remaining officers positioned themselves at key points inside the house without touching a single guest. It wasn't dramatic. It was organized. One guest whispered, "Are we being detained?" An officer answered politely, "No, ma'am. You're free to leave once we complete our initial security assessment. For now, please remain where you are. No shouting, no panic, just procedure." Albert looked around as though waiting for someone to object on his behalf. No one did. The state senator quietly stepped backward. A local judge avoided eye contact altogether. Apparently, influence had very clear limits. My mother finally broke the silence. "This is absurd." She hurried toward Chief Sterling, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "Our daughter has been struggling emotionally." Chief Sterling looked at her without interrupting. "She's under tremendous pressure." Silence. "We were only trying to help." Still nothing. "She hasn't been herself." Chief Sterling finally spoke. "Define help." Eleanor blinked. "We removed medication that was affecting her judgment." "By whose medical recommendation?" "I'm her mother. I asked for the medical recommendation. There wasn't a physician? No. A neurologist? No. A licensed pharmacist? No. A military medical officer?" She hesitated. "No." Chief Sterling nodded once and made another note inside his notebook. My mother became visibly frustrated. "You don't understand." "No, Mrs. Garrison." His tone remained completely even. "I understand exactly what has been admitted." She looked toward me. "Audrey, tell them you've been confused lately." I met her eyes. "No. You've been exhausted. I've been deprived of prescribed treatment. We're your parents. That doesn't make you my doctors." Several guests quietly looked away. Nobody wanted to be standing close enough to hear this conversation anymore. My father stepped between Chief Sterling and my mother. I think this interview is finished. It has not begun. I've answered enough questions. You've admitted possession. I've admitted responsible parenting. You admitted unauthorized custody. Albert folded his arms again. You military people love making paperwork more important than common sense. Chief Sterling looked at him steadily. Common sense is why chain of custody procedures exist. You keep using that phrase. I'll explain it. He reached into a leather document case carried by one of the medical compliance specialists standing behind him. The specialist handed over a sealed folder. Chief Sterling opened it carefully. Inside sat several official documents bearing Navy Medical Command letterhead and federal certification stamps. He removed the first page. Mr. Garrison. Albert didn't move. This is a certified federal compliance audit authorization. He held the document where Albert could clearly read it. Lieutenant Commander Audrey Garrison reported an interruption in the documented chain of custody involving federally regulated Class II controlled medication. Albert gave a dismissive wave. I already told you it's secure. That statement is irrelevant. It's in my safe, which is precisely why we're here. He continued reading. Federal protocol requires immediate physical verification whenever allocated medical property leaves authorized custody. One of the businessmen in the room quietly asked another guest, "He's talking about an actual audit?" The other man nodded slowly. "I think so." Chief Sterling lowered the document. The medication is not considered private household property. Albert shook his head. It entered my home. It remained federal medical property. I locked it away for safekeeping. You interrupted documented custody. I prevented mischief. You created an unverified storage environment. Albert frowned. What does that even mean? It means we no longer know. Know what? If the medication has been tampered with. If dosage integrity remains intact. If storage conditions meet federal standards. If any quantity has been altered. If substitution occurred. Each sentence landed harder than the one before it. Albert's confidence started slipping. I never touched it. Chief Sterling answered immediately. You've already acknowledged possession. I didn't mean. You answered clearly. My father looked around the room again. Nobody came to his defense. Not one person. The senator quietly checked his watch. Someone near the buffet suddenly found the cheese display extremely interesting. Amazing how quickly wealthy people discover other appointments. Chief Sterling returned the audit order to its folder. Mr. Garrison, no response. Lead us to the storage location. No. The answer sounded weaker this time. You misunderstand your options. I know my rights. So do I. This is still my home. It is currently the location of federally documented evidence. Albert took one step backward. I'm calling my attorney. You're welcome to do so. He pulled out his phone. Chief Sterling didn't stop him. Instead, he looked toward one of the shore patrol officers. Document time. Yes, Chief. The officer noted the exact time on a digital incident log. Albert slowly lowered the phone without making the call. Perhaps for the first time, he realized nobody was trying to stop him. They simply weren't waiting for his permission anymore. Chief Sterling spoke again. You reported the medication is inside your study safe. Albert stayed silent. Correct? After several long seconds. Yes. Then you will escort us there. I refuse. Chief Sterling nodded toward two shore patrol officers, mate in separation. The officers immediately stepped into position. One stood to Albert's left. The other positioned himself to his right. Neither grabbed him, neither threatened him. They simply eliminated every easy path back toward the guests. My mother's composure finally cracked. You can't treat us like criminals. One officer politely extended an open hand. Mrs. Garrison, please remain with your husband. This is outrageous. No, ma'am. His voice stayed calm. This is standard procedure. She looked desperately toward the guests. No one moved, no one argued, no one offered support. The same people who had spent years praising my parents suddenly became very interested in avoiding eye contact. Status was contagious. Apparently so was accountability. Chief Sterling adjusted one cuff on his dress uniform. Mr. Garrison. Albert stared at him. The audit begins now. Without another word, the shore patrol officers turned with my parents between them. No handcuffs, no force, none was necessary. With uniformed officers forming a quiet wall on both sides, Albert and Eleanor walked down their own hallway while every guest watched in complete silence. For the first time since my parents bought the estate, They weren't leading visitors through their home with pride. They were being escorted toward the study, like the people least in control of what waited behind the safe door. I followed several steps behind the shore patrol officers, forcing my legs to keep moving, even though every muscle argued with the decision. The walk from the foyer to my father's study couldn't have been more than 40 feet. It felt like 40 miles. The hallway that had always displayed framed family portraits suddenly looked different. Every smiling photograph carried the same message. Perfect family, perfect success, perfect image. Funny how paper and polished wood could lie so convincingly. My father stopped outside the mahogany study door. "This has gone far enough." Chief Sterling answered without hesitation. "No, Mr. Garrison." He gestured toward the door. "Open it." Albert hesitated. One shore patrol officer quietly noted the delay on his incident log. My father noticed. "You people really write down everything." Chief Sterling looked at him. "We're trained to remember facts." Albert opened the study. The familiar scent of leather, old books, and expensive bourbon filled the room. This had always in his kingdom. Dark mahogany shelves, imported Persian rug, custom-built desk. The heavy wall safe sat behind a large oil painting of an old sailing ship. As a teenager, I used to think it held valuable jewelry. Turns out I had underestimated what my family considered valuable. Chief Sterling stepped inside first. 2 Navy medical compliance specialists followed. A pair of local police detectives entered behind them. I hadn't even noticed the detectives arrive earlier. One introduced himself briefly. "Detective Ryan Keller, Fairfax County." The other nodded. "Detective Monica Hayes." Chief Sterling acknowledged them. "Thank you for responding. Happy to assist." Neither detective tried to take over. This was still a federal compliance investigation. They were there because local jurisdiction could become relevant depending on what appeared inside the safe. Chief Sterling turned back toward my father. "Please expose the storage compartment." Albert pulled the painting aside with visible irritation. The steel safe appeared. Commercial grade. Digital keypad with mechanical backup. Chief Sterling checked the serial number. One of the compliance specialists photographed it. Then another photograph documented the unopened door. Everything became evidence. Everything became part of the record. Albert sighed loudly. "This is ridiculous." Chief Sterling ignored the comment. "Open the safe." "I've already told you what's inside. Open it." My father looked toward the detectives. "Surely this isn't necessary," Detective Keller answered calmly. "If you've already described the contents accurately, opening it should resolve the issue." Albert didn't respond. Instead, he placed his hand against the keypad. For the first time that afternoon, I noticed it. His fingers were shaking, not nearly as badly as mine, but enough that he entered the first 4 digits incorrectly. The keypad buzzed. Inmilant. His jaw tightened. He tried again. The gold signet ring on his right hand caught the light from the desk lamp as he carefully pressed each number. This time the lock clicked. A heavy mechanical sound echoed through the study. Chief Sterling looked toward the medical specialist. Recording active. The safe door swung open. Inside sat my brown leather Navy medical pouch, exactly where my father had claimed. The sight of it brought an unexpected feeling. Not relief, anger. Something so essential to my health had spent nearly 24 hours locked in because my family believed control mattered more than my well-being. Chief Sterling spoke. Photograph before retrieval. Several photographs documented the untouched contents. Only then did one of the compliance specialists put on fresh nitrile gloves. He carefully removed the pouch and placed it on the desk. Another specialist immediately verified the tamper-evident seal. Seal intact. Chief Sterling nodded. Open for chemical verification. The specialist broke the seal and removed the medication case. Each vial was scanned individually against its inventory barcode. Container 1 verified. Container 2 verified. Container 3 verified. Every serial number matched the federal inventory database. I finally allowed myself one slow breath. At least the medication hadn't been altered. Then the specialist paused. "Chief, what is it?" "There's another item." Beneath the medical pouch sat a thick gray document folder. No government markings, no labels. Just an ordinary expandable file. Chief Sterling looked toward my father. "What is this?" Albert answered too quickly. "I don't know." The room became quiet again. The specialist lifted the folder onto the desk. It felt unusually heavy. He opened it. Page after page of financial records appeared. Bank statements, corporate ledgers, wire transfer confirmations, several LLC operating agreements. The detectives immediately stepped closer. Detective Hayes picked up the first document. These aren't medical records. No, Detective Keller said quietly. They're business records. A name appeared repeatedly across multiple pages. Clara Garrison Fine Arts, LLC. Another company, Blue Harbor Cultural Holdings. Another, North Meridian Consulting Group. The names changed. The signatures didn't. Detective Hayes turned another page. Offshore transfers. Detective Keller frowned. Cayman Islands, another page. British Virgin Islands, then another. Multiple shell entities. Chief Sterling looked at my father. Would you like to revise your statement regarding the contents of this safe? Albert stared at the paperwork. I've never seen those. Nobody answered. Nobody believed him. Detective Keller carefully examined a ledger. This company reported annual losses. He flipped another page. Yet here's a transfer of $486,000 to an offshore account. Detective Hayes found another file. Tax correspondence. She looked up. This references an upcoming federal audit. My father swallowed. I was holding documents for my daughter. There it was. Not denial anymore, admission. My daughter asked me to keep them secure. Chief Sterling quietly stepped away from the desk. His investigation concerning my medication had effectively reached its conclusion. The detectives were now seeing something entirely different. Detective Keller continued sorting through the documents. Multiple altered invoices, duplicate payment records, personal expenses billed as gallery operations. Hayes opened another envelope. Driver's license copies, several names. None belonged to Clara. She looked at Keller. Possible identity fraud. He nodded once, and these signatures don't match. Another officer photographed every document before anyone touched another page. Evidence markers appeared on the desk. My father looked around the room as though searching for someone to rescue him. Nobody moved. Not my mother, not Clara, not even the attorneys he kept on speed dial. The silence inside the study became overwhelming. Chief Sterling turned toward me. Lieutenant Commander. Yes, Chief. Your allocated medication has been recovered and chemically verified. Understood. It will be returned to authorized custody immediately following documentation. Thank you, Chief. He gave one brief nod, then stepped aside as the detectives continued examining the expanding pile of financial records. What had begun as a federal compliance audit over stolen Navy medication no longer fit inside a single investigation. Every document pulled from beneath my medical kit revealed another discrepancy. Another false ledger, another hidden transfer, another identity, another lie. The safe my father believed would prove he was protecting his family had become the very place where investigators uncovered the paper trail that connected fraudulent business records, concealed offshore transactions, suspected money laundering, tax evasion, and possible identity theft. For years, my parents had convinced everyone that our family fortune rested on hard work and impeccable judgment. It turned out the strongest thing holding their empire together wasn't success. It was a locked steel door that should never have been opened. I watched Detective Keller close the evidence box with a numbered security seal. The click sounded final, not dramatic, just final. Chief Sterling handed my recovered medical pouch to one of the Navy compliance specialists. Maintain documented custody. Yes, Chief. The specialist scanned the barcode once more before placing it inside a locked government transport case. For the first time in more than a day, my medication was back where it belonged. Not in my hands yet, but back inside the chain of custody. That mattered. Detective Hayes stepped away from the desk and quietly answered a call on her radio. She listened for less than 30 seconds. Understood. When she hung up, she looked directly at Detective Keller. The Commonwealth attorney reviewed the preliminary evidence. He nodded. I figured. They're moving immediately. No one in the room looked surprised. The amount of documentations sitting inside those evidence boxes spoke for itself. Within minutes, 2 additional Fairfax County officers entered the study carrying printed documents inside sealed folders. One officer addressed Detective Keller. Warrants authorized. He accepted the paperwork and reviewed each page carefully. Albert finally found his voice. You can't be serious. Detective Keller looked up. I am. This happened 20 minutes ago. The evidence was transmitted electronically while we remained on scene. My attorney hasn't even arrived. You're welcome to contact your attorney. Albert pointed toward the evidence boxes. Those papers don't prove anything. They don't need to prove everything today. They establish probable cause. My father shook his head. This is political. No, it's procedure. He looked toward me. This is because of you. I met his eyes. No. This started because you reported stolen medication. It started because you stole it. For a second, I thought he might argue. Instead, he looked away. Chief Sterling remained silent. His responsibility had never been deciding criminal charges. His responsibility had been protecting federal medical accountability. Everything beyond that belonged to law enforcement. The detectives turned toward Clara. She had been standing near the doorway since the financial records were discovered. Her confidence had disappeared hours ago. This isn't my fault, she said immediately. Detective Hayes opened one of the folders. Clara Garrison? Yes. These business entities are registered under your name. My accountant handled everything. These signatures appear to be yours. I signed what people told me to sign. She looked desperately toward my father. Dad, Albert stayed silent. The silence answered her better than words ever could. You said everything was legal. No response. You told me storing the files here was safer. Still nothing. Clara's voice cracked. Dad! Detective Keller folded the warrant. Miss Garrison, he spoke respectfully. You have the right to remain silent. The words hung in the study like cold air. My mother grabbed the edge of the desk. No. Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. No, this isn't happening. Detective Hayes turned toward her. Eleanor Garrison, I'm just her mother. You are also listed as an officer on multiple financial accounts. I signed charity paperwork. You may explain that later. I didn't know. Detective Keller answered quietly. Mrs. Garrison, this isn't the time to discuss evidence. Outside the study, I could hear voices spreading through the house. News traveled fast, especially among wealthy people. Someone whispered that police had warrants. Someone else quietly suggested leaving before reporters arrived. By the time we stepped back into the foyer, almost half the guests had disappeared. The remaining 36 stood scattered around the ballroom in complete silence. Nobody touched the food. Nobody touched the champagne. The quartet had quietly packed away their instruments. The front doors opened again. This time it wasn't additional Navy personnel. It was local uniformed police officers. Behind them, through the tall windows, I noticed something else. 2 local television vans, a newspaper photographer. Apparently someone monitoring police radio traffic had arrived faster than expected. Camera flashes started reflecting off the front windows. Albert stopped walking. I'm not going out there. You don't have a choice, Detective Keller replied. One officer stepped beside him, not aggressively, professionally. The guests instinctively moved apart, creating a clear path through the center of the foyer. The same hallway my parents had always used to welcome important visitors had become the route they would now take under police escort. Clara suddenly turned toward me. This is all because of you. Her voice echoed through the ballroom. You destroyed everything. I didn't answer. She took another step despite an officer raising a hand to stop her. For what? She laughed bitterly. For a handful of pills? Several guests looked at me, then at her. I finally spoke. It was never about the medication. You reported us. I reported stolen federal medical property. You ruined this family. I looked around the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, imported marble, expensive paintings. Guests pretending they had never admired any of it. This family ruined itself. Clara's face twisted with anger. You always hated us because nobody cared about your stupid Navy career. I never wanted applause. You wanted revenge. I wanted my medication. She opened her mouth again. Nothing came out. For the first time in her life, blaming someone else wasn't changing reality. My mother suddenly reached her toward me. Her eyes filled with tears. Audrey, I looked at her. Please. Her voice barely carried. Tell them this was a misunderstanding. I stayed silent. They'll listen to you. Another tear rolled down her cheek. We're your family. I remembered standing in the hallway asking for my medication. I remembered my father's finger pressed against my Navy ID. I remembered Clara smiling while asking me to sign away my retirement. Family, interesting word. You can stop this. No, her shoulders slumped. Please. I can't tell investigators something that isn't true. We were trying to help. No, we made mistakes. You made choices. She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. I simply didn't reach back. There wasn't any anger left inside me. No satisfaction. No desire to humiliate them, only exhaustion. The officer secured handcuffs according to procedure. Albert first, then Eleanor, then Clara. No one resisted. The photographers outside captured every second. Flash after flash reflected through the open doorway. Guests quietly stepped farther back, making room as police escorted my family toward the waiting transport vehicles. I remained exactly where I was, standing straight despite the tremor still running through my body. Chief Sterling glanced toward me once. He didn't interrupt. He understood. Some moments belong to regulations. Others belong to the people living through them. Outside, the afternoon air carried the sound of camera shutters, reporters calling questions, and engines idling. Albert never looked back. Neither did Clara. My mother looked once, only once. Then the first transport van door closed. A second later, the other followed. The heavy steel doors slammed shut one after the other, the sound rolling across the stone walls of this estate that had once represented everything my parents wanted the world to admire. When the convoy finally pulled away, the reporters followed. The guests disappeared. The music never resumed. The chandeliers still glowed over polished marble floors, untouched dinner tables, and expensive artwork. But without the lies holding everything together, the grand house no longer felt impressive. It felt empty. And for the first time in my life, the silence inside it belonged to the truth. I slipped my Navy ID back into my pocket after the corpsman handed me my updated treatment schedule. Same dosage, he said. Same 12-hour interval, your labs look good. Thank you. And Lieutenant Commander? Yes? Don't miss another dose. I smiled. That isn't part of my plan. 3 weeks had passed since the investigation at my parents' estate. 3 weeks of proper treatment at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth before returning to Norfolk. 3 weeks without negotiations, manipulation, or someone deciding they knew more than my physicians. The tremors were gone. The stiffness had disappeared. My vision was clear again. The only reminder of those days was a small bruise where countless blood samples had been drawn during my evaluation. I'd gladly take that over wondering whether I would make it through another hour without medication. The paperwork had been endless: medical evaluations, compliance interviews, evidence statements. Every interview ended the same way. Tell us exactly what happened. So I did. Not once did anyone ask me why I hadn't protected my parents. They asked for facts. Facts were enough. As I walked across the pier toward my ship, the familiar sounds of the waterfront replaced everything I'd left behind. Forklifts unloaded supply pallets. A tugboat eased a cargo vessel toward the next berth. Someone shouted inventory numbers across the dock. Diesel engines hummed in the background while seabirds circled overhead looking for an easy meal. It felt normal, comfortingly normal. No chandeliers, no crystal glasses, no pretending. Just people doing their jobs. That was one of the reasons I'd stayed in the Navy so long. Nobody cared where your parents lived. Nobody cared how expensive your clothes were. If you completed the mission, people trusted you. If you didn't, they expected you to improve. Simple, fair, honest. Chief Sterling spotted me walking toward the logistics office. He gave the same brief nod he'd given me inside my parents' foyer. Lieutenant Commander, Chief, how are you feeling? Much better. I read the medical clearance. So did I. He allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile, I figured. For a man who rarely wasted words, that almost counted as humor. I wanted to thank you. You already did. I don't think I did. You filed the report correctly. I almost didn't, but you did. I looked across the harbor. My father kept saying it was a family matter. Chief Sterling folded his hands behind his back. A family matter ends where federal custody begins. I know. He looked toward the water. A lot of officers hesitate. I almost did. People confuse compassion with avoiding accountability. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Finally, he added, "You didn't create the consequences. They did. Exactly." He excused himself for another meeting, leaving me alone on the pier. I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers closed around something cold. An old pair of dog tags. The chain had worn smooth after years of deployments. My father used to hate seeing them around my neck. He once told me they made family dinners look depressing. Another time he suggested I leave them in the car because people don't need reminders that you chose the military. I never argued. I simply kept wearing them. Now I held the metal between my fingers, letting it warm against my hand. My name, my service number, my blood type, nothing flashy, nothing expensive. Just an honest record of who I was. For years, I believed proving myself would eventually earn my parents' respect. Every promotion, every commendation, every deployment. I thought maybe the next accomplishment would finally be enough. It never was. Because the problem had never been my service. The problem was that my independence couldn't be controlled. The investigation had changed more than criminal cases. It had changed how I measured my own life. I no longer asked whether my family approved. I asked whether I could respect the choices I made when I looked in the mirror. That question was much easier to answer. A text message arrived from one of my fellow officers. "Dinner at O'Malley's tonight? Everyone's buying since you're finally cleared for duty again." I laughed. No speeches, no dramatic celebration. Just co-workers looking for an excuse to order too many appetizers. Perfect. As I started walking again, something else in my pocket caught my attention. A small ring of keys, front gate, side entrance, wine cellar, study. Every spare key my parents had insisted I keep because family should always have access. I turned them over in my hand. Steel, ordinary, completely useless now. There wasn't a single room in that house I wanted to enter again. I walked to the edge of the pier. The Atlantic rolled quietly beneath the pilings. I looked at the keys one last time, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just acceptance. Some doors deserve to stay closed. I opened my hand. The keys slipped through my fingers. They struck the surface with a soft splash before disappearing into the deep water below. No ceremony, no audience, no applause. Just the end of something that had already been over for a long time. I adjusted my sea bag on my shoulder and headed back toward my ship without looking behind me. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward my own life. For 30 years, I lived under a roof where my worth was treated as something that could be spent to make someone else shine. I used to think keeping the peace meant staying quiet, accepting the insults, and convincing myself that enduring them made me strong. Lying in a Navy hospital bed after my treatment was finally back on schedule, I realized how wrong I had been. Real strength isn't measured by how much abuse you can survive. It's measured by the moment you decide enough is enough and refuse to let anyone, even the people who raised you, decide what your life is worth. Respect isn't something you beg people to give you. It's something you protect with clear boundaries and the courage to enforce them. My scars came from serving something bigger than myself, and I will never apologize for them. My parents chose appearances over honesty, control over love, and shortcuts over integrity. Those choices belong to them. They don't belong to me. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, or maybe even of yourself, I hope you remember one thing. Never confuse loyalty with surrender. The people who truly love you will never demand that you sacrifice your health, your future, or your dignity just to make them comfortable. And before you leave, take a look at the story waiting on your screen. It's another unforgettable family case our viewers still talk about, and if this journey stayed with you, I think that one will, too.